Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion, and as you can tell from the title, I'm continuing my reviews of the episodes of Fawlty Towers. We're now on to episode 3 of season 2, Waldorf Salad, which before the 80s VHS releases, it was listed as USA, which is an interesting title, but I think Waldorf Salad fits a little bit better because that is the major thing that really incites the plot as it starts to go off the rails in the second half. The plot is it seems like it's an average day at the hotel, and then the American guest shows up. And when I say American guest, think of all the American stereotypes you can cram into one character, especially when viewed through the lens of a European writer in a European setting, especially in the 70s. And that sums up this character. He's obnoxious, he's outspoken, very loud, very opinionated, has a very big bias against non-American cultures. And that one comes in the form of him complaining constantly about Britain, about the weather and all that. Which, as an aside, I kind of get because there seems to be a little bit of truth in that stereotype, depending on the person you're talking about and talking to. But at the same time, it raises a thing of if you don't like the other culture and all that, then why the hell are you going? Of course, with this character is an obvious reason. His wife is British, so he's putting up with it just to appease her. So that seems to be a thing that transcends culture and country and all that. But it's there, and probably also wants to learn about it and see where his wife grew up. Probably also visiting her extended family. So there's that. But the fact that he constantly complains about it, it's like just shut up. But we know why it's there. It's there for comedy because, as I mentioned before, you got to have friction in order to have comedy. And of course, they give him the most American name you can think of, Mr. Hamilton. Well, he gets there right as the kitchen is closing. He wants a big hot meal and all that, and that's where his little first complaint comes from. And then he bribes Basil with 20 pounds in order to keep the kitchen open. Now, here's the fun thing about that. 20 pounds when this episode was produced. When you adjust that for inflation, that's 169 pounds sterling today. Or if you convert that to American currency, that's $223. That is a sizable bribe. So when you look at it through that lens, it's like no wonder he gets mad in the latter half when he finds out what happened. Well, Basil goes to get the chef to keep going. The chef agrees, hour and a half after a little bit of haggling. But of course, Basil, being his normal self, decides not to pay the chef when he finds out that the chef is not missing a class in order to do this. He's missing fun time. So he decides he's going to do everything himself. And things just keep going off the rails, especially when he learns what Hamilton wants for his dinner. He wants a Waldorf salad coming from the Waldorf Hotel in New York. Basil has no idea what it is. Even when he finds out what it is, he can't find everything. And he just keeps coming up with excuses, like Cleese even himself said. He just loves with how Basil comes up with excuses like that, but they're never that good. And this is another example of that. None of them are good. They're always overblown. So in that case, this American character, Mr. Hamilton, it is quite a head-to-head clash with them because they're both outspoken people. So you got a British outspoken person and an American outspoken person. And the American one is a little bit more outspoken and a little bit more violent. Because there's a couple points with this character that if a guest at the hotel casino I worked at did this crap, we would be called and his butt would be walked out. And if he refused, he'd be getting a shiny pair of bracelets. That's how bad this character is. Of course, Basil tries his best, but it's his wife, Sybil, that is able to really help the guest. She's the one that figures out how to do the salads. And Basil's still trying to act like the chef is back there. And when the guest finds out, he has the reaction you would expect. Then he lambasts Basil in front of all the other guests. So you satisfied customers, some unsatisfied customers from before his arrival give their complaints. And then Basil lets out an epic rant about them. We're trying to run a hotel here. Basically, his rant is summed up with, we could run this hotel properly if it wasn't for the guests. Basil leaves, but then he comes back in, checks in, and that's the end of the episode proper. It's a pretty fun episode. Most of it derives and revolves around Basil trying to make sure that these guests are happy, trying to get their food done right, even though he's doing it himself, burning the meat. He's also trying to save face a lot, and there's a lot of times when I was watching this, I'm like shaking my head like, Basil, you are such an idiot right now. Quit trying to kiss their butts. Just get their food done and go on it. But of course, if Basil actually had a brain like that, there'd be no show half the time. It's just like with Raymond, like, if you lock a door, there's no show. One fun thing about this episode is that, in a nutshell, it is inspired by the incident that gave Cleese the original inspiration for this show in general, and that is, I've covered this story in the pilot episode, but where they stayed at a hotel in Torquay run by Mr. Sinclair. Sinclair saw Terry Gilliam eating the American style, cutting, and then cutting with knife, fork, drop knife. And like, we don't eat like that in this country. And then, of course, the whole bomb suitcase incident, and then getting involved in the argument with Graham Chapman about pre-booking the TV in the common room to watch a program. All those incidents combined went into the formation of this one, where it's a foreign guest, culture clash, personality clash, perfect thing. Obviously, a lot of the specific plot elements are not fully based on that inciting incident, but the interactions and the culture clash is. So it took the inciting incident to its logical conclusion. And of course, unlike what actually happened in real life, from what Cleese is told, where they're just trying to give reasonable requests, here, it's kind of an unreasonable one. I mean, it's a little reasonable, but it's... Basil already explained to the guests that chef leaves at 9. You already passed 9. And then him getting all uppity, it's like, dude, you can't just complain your way into getting everything you want. That's one thing I've learned definitely is true working in customer service. That phrase, the customer is always right, not always accurate. Like, I'd say like 80% of the time it's not accurate. And in this case, it definitely applies, because this customer is not right when it comes to how he's interacted with Basil at the front end of this. I mean, you were already just told you missed the cutoff point. There has to be a cutoff point for a reason. And then him bribing it, of course, near the end, after he's already paid the bribe, you understand why he's upset. But it's like, should have gotten there earlier. That whole little chestnut. And of course, Basil's rant at the end of the episode definitely sums up the whole thing that Cleese got. His whole impression of Mr. Sinclair that inspired Basil. All that is personified in that ending rant. And of course, any business owner that hates dealing with guests will probably identify a little bit with that. They might not identify with it as closely as, say, someone like Basil that hates all the guests that come in. Let's face it or not, even though he works in customer service, Basil hates every guest that comes in. I mean, there's a reason why there's that motto, we could run this if it wasn't for the guests. The only ones he seems to care about are the highbrow ones, and of course the ones that are there all the time, like Major and then the ladies. Everyone else is like, frick them. There are some interesting little moments in this one, though. We find out that Basil and Sybil have been married for 15 years, and that's about how long the hotel has been open. Major has been in the hotel for 7 years, so that would explain part of the reason why Basil puts up with his eccentric behavior. Of course, Basil also paid for Manuel to come from Spain, so that also explains why they put up with him. It's like, all right. And funny thing, Manuel and Polly only appear in the first half of the episode, so a lot of the antics are not even around there for. I mean, it could have been so easy just to write Manuel to do a bunch of weird stuff during the ending part, but having him not there, I think, makes it a bit funnier, because all the bad stuff that happened, all on Basil. And Basil doesn't have the outlet to go and hit Manuel, smack him or whatnot, yell at Polly. The only person he has to talk to that works there is his wife. Acting-wise, all the background extras do a decent job with the material they have. John Cleese is always excellent as Basil, no matter which episode it is. His over-the-top reactions and body language, facial expressions, great. And the way he delivers that ending rant is perfect. Of the non-regulars, if there's any actor that really helps this episode, that'd be Bruce Boa as Harry Hamilton. Which, funny enough, he is American, but he's not from the States. He is Canadian. Something that I knew going into this episode, but based on the accent, I wouldn't have picked up on that, because he doesn't have that archetypical Canadian accent, eh? Make him sound like a bunch of hosers. Well, sorry about that. I can't really do a Canadian accent that well, but he doesn't sound like he's from Canada. But then again, I wouldn't say people like Jericho do either. But then again, maybe it's a subtle one. Then again, I've been told by coworkers I have an accent, but I don't really hear it. But then again, that probably is just me. Maybe it's very subtle. The funny thing is that this is a stock character for Mr. Boa, because he spent his entire career in Britain playing obnoxious American stock characters. And of course, he met Cleese in '67 and they became fast friends, which even if he didn't intend to cast Boa in this role, he probably subconsciously was drawing on the type of characters he knew he played in order to write him. And Boa even said in a 2004 interview that, and I quote, "When I went to the audition and read the script, I told them right away there was no one else in England who could play the part. I handed the script right back with NAR written all over it. No acting required." And of course, because of that, there's the rumors that Cleese even wrote the role for him. But like I said, even if he didn't, he probably subconsciously drew on it, thinking like, yeah, we'll probably cast Boa. And then when he saw that, like, we got the right guy. And even though their characters are not friendly on screen, because they're friends in real life and they're playing characters with similar personalities that clash, there is a good chemistry between Boa and Cleese. And that adds to the friction on screen, and you really believe that these two men do not like each other like that. Their culture clash and all that, it makes it very, very believable. And that adds to both the drama and the comedy. And even though for my first watch, I don't remember this being one of my favorite episodes, upon this reflection a couple years later, I'd say this is definitely, if I had to do like a short list of favorite episodes, this would be on there. Which, I mean, there's only 2 seasons, so there's not a lot of episodes to list. But like if I had to do a top 3, this would probably be on there. I'd have to look back at the episodes and like really like, but it definitely would make the short list. There's not much else to say about this episode. Interesting premise. Characters all do a pretty good job. The interactions are funny. The ending rant, excellent. There's a couple moments where Mr. Hamilton, his words and what he says he's going to do border on criminal, like at the end where he threatens Basil with physical harm. I think at that point, even if he doesn't have his own security, they should have called the cops at that point. But, you know, did that, there's no comedy, even though that would have been funny in and of itself. Honey, they're right. I'm being arrested in Britain. And all that. And it definitely, if you're going to watch 1 or 2 episodes of this show just to get the feel of it, this is one from the second season you should watch. Now, the next one, episode 4, is another episode that definitely centers around something that hotel owners definitely have to deal with at times. That, of course, is the Kipper and the Corpse.